You're listening to the 4-Phase Cycle podcast with your hosts, Dr. Alex and Megan of ZESTY Ginger. If you're looking to naturally balance hormones and learn how to work with your body instead of against it, you've definitely come to the right place. As a duo of an integrative MD and a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner and best friends, we use the 4 phases of the female cycle in combination with functional lab work and mindset practices to transform the lives of the women we work with.
We also have a whole lot of fun along the way. If you're new around here, it's best to start with season 1 before jumping around and plan to roll up your sleeves. Showing up for ourselves and enjoying our lives is what good health is all about. Just a quick reminder though, this information is not intended to diagnose, manage, or treat disease. Always consult with your doctor before making changes.
Hello, lovely souls. Alex here. Welcome to the podcast. So glad that you are here. We're going to be talking about resistance versus that doesn't apply to me today. And this is something that I hear people talk about all the time. And it's kind of like describing when people answer their take on it. It's kind of like describing what foods work for someone or a supplement plan or a way to handle communication. I think that there's lots of different ways that our different bodies, our physical body, mental, emotional, spiritual, communicate with us. And for each of us, there's a slightly different balance with that, kind of like our genetics is with it. However, I think what happens is that because we don't really talk about, like, how do you feel that something is different for you, there's just a lot of miscommunication around it because many of us have not been taught how to be discerning of internal things like that. So we're not really that clear about it. And so with this, as I share what works for me, just keep in mind that if you're really jiving with it and you're like, oh, I can really begin, I may not have a complete knowing, but I can conceptually understand that that happens for me too. Awesome. And if not, keep listening because really the invitation, the way that I'm going to be describing it is sort of a step by step of what happens internally. And when you can watch someone take it apart a little bit, then there are things that are like, oh, that I do resonate with that, I don't resonate with that, and then we get to go explore, right? So this can still get started, even if you aren't 100% the exact same in processing things that I would be, right? So that is kind of the overall thing about this podcast episode, right? Now, here's the actual topic. So, with self development, with decisions in life, when we are intentional about growth in our life, there is often a question of when we get to something like, hey, I need to reach out to this person in my business, or it's time to make that sales call, or it's time to have that uncomfortable conversation with my partner, or I need to ask my boss for this. There is the question of when I feel nervous or I'm having discomfort around it, I really don't want to do it. Even things that we perceive are good. For example, I'll be talking about this more, but there's a mirror exercise for body things that Megan and I have been chatting about. And really, across the board, when we bring this up with people, people are like, I don't want to, that sounds horrible. Or like, I have a lot of resistance to it, right? And so there's some things that many of us find uncomfortable to do. And we all agree on that kind of thing, like difficult conversations with partners or asking an authority figure for something that they may not want to give you, right? Like a raise or whatever. There's resistance of like, I really don't want to do it, but this is a growth opportunity. Public speaking is like this. And then there's the, I feel bad about this. This feels icky because it's really just not the right thing for me. And isn't that kind of the question, right? Am I nervous because I'm growing, or am I nervous because I shouldn't be going down this path? This is a really important thing then, to begin to get familiar for you around, for each of us around, because it's literally how we can figure out what moves we need to make and how we actually listen to our own internal compass. That's essentially what it becomes. What is my compass telling me? And in order to understand the compass, we need to kind of look at it, flip it around, look at how it works, and then we get to use that compass. And however we interact with that compass is essentially the, straight, relatively, for life, straightforward path, or we can meander. This is also true though. Now, big decisions or things that are difficult like that happen in life. But what's actually much more common, and this is going to be kind of your in, or it was my in, rather, I'll just share my story. There's a lot more opportunities to practice the internal discernment compass that we have than we have often been made to believe, because for difficult decisions, however you define difficult, is is something that we think about and we know about, right? But more often than not, what I realized was that this was coming up for me time and time again all throughout the day. And what was happening was that every time I opened a meme, I had to open Instagram to post something, right? Or Facebook to go into our Health Transformation Accelerator group. Anytime that I would do, a meme would pop up and you read it, and it's like sometimes you resonate with it, and sometimes you're like, oh, God, that just made me feel like guilty or bad, or like I wish I wasn't like that, or they're pointing out something that I clearly do, right? And you just feel bad about it. And then sometimes we're angry. You're like, oh my God, I know, I've heard that 10,000 times. Like, I just can't get there, right? There's all these different versions that happen. Or your partner fires off an opinion, you should, or you need to, or I think you would benefit, whatever it is, or things at work, well meaning coworkers. And here's the thing, even coaches. This one really got me, because I was like, I'm literally paying these people to help guide me. And so I feel very silly questioning authority. It went down the rabbit hole of authority so hard for me that I couldn't even really give myself the the responsibility of deciding what applied to me or what didn't. And when you start looking at all of those things across the board, it just opened my eyes to how often this comes up in life. And for me, I was way on the side of following what other people say. If they were authority, I'm like, I listen to this person, I clearly paid them to help me, or, they're my boss or they're my mentor, they know better. And that's certainly true in certain scenarios. And yet, it was like I would take every post, I would take every suggestion, and I would take it very, very seriously. Even within the, obviously there's a lot of stuff that you're like, well, whatever, that's nothing. I'm not talking about that kind of stuff, but quite a bit. You curate your social media, you curate who you talk to, you figure out who you get guidance from, and all of those voices a lot of times become this whole thing where people are telling us what would be best for us, what their opinion is, and all of that. It happens, turns out, all the time. And what I was doing was I was actually seeking it out. So if I was having a hard time, I'd get another coach, or I'd get a book, or I would, do I have all these like oracle card decks or tarot card decks, and whatever. There's a million and 10 ways to offload not decision making, and I'm not saying that in a bad way. It's not a judgment thing. We are told look for help, and a lot of times that works great. I love having coaches. I love my oracle card decks. I think they're super fun, and it's just like all these ways to get at different information and think about things. But it does have a dark side sometimes when, especially when we are beginning to transition more and more into what is going to work best for me. And then we begin to really appreciate just how many voices there are that say, not even intentionally all the time, but here's my opinion. I really think you should weigh it. One of the first places that I noticed this actually wasn't with like life decisions, but was with beliefs, which was fascinating because there's lots of podcast episodes that I've shared here where I'm like, that didn't really work for me. For example, trauma made me stronger. Right? There's just a couple podcast episodes ago, maybe about 4 or 5, I can't remember exactly, where I talked about, for me, that didn't resonate. That felt incredibly disempowering. It felt like, gosh, my belief is saying, well, I won't rehash the podcast episode. You can listen to it. But essentially, I was like, that one, I've seen a million things about it. And every time I try to make myself fit that belief and have my beliefs match that up as if it was the truth overall for people, I was deeply unhappy. I felt disempowered. I felt weak, right? I felt like I was second guessing myself all the time about it. I felt like I couldn't move forward with healing from trauma because the whole time I'm like, I'm trying to make this a good thing. And of course, there's lots more to it, and I go into it in the podcast. But that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about, where it's these big concepts that I started noticing. Man, that actually, like, every time someone says that, I just recently did one on surrender and kind of people forcing the surrender narrative onto people's timelines. Like, well, now you should surrender, right? They're deciding for you, oh, you're in this position, that's what you need to do. Time and time again, that's the kind of thing that was coming up. And I was getting really, really angry. And it started with being angry at myself. Why can't I make that make sense for me? Why am I angry about this? I was just so confused. I'm like, I'm doing all the right stuff. I'm following through on this. I'm journaling about, I did everything. You know how I roll. You've been around for long enough. I take that stuff seriously, right? I take my intentional transformation very, very seriously. And in trying to do that, it caused a great deal of unhappiness for me. And that's where I first even started thinking about this concept of like, do I not want to surrender and I have a resistance to it? Or is it not for me right in this second? Not ever. But does that apply to me now? Does that serve me now? And does it empower me now? And that's when I went, oh, holy cow. Just because other people said it doesn't mean I have to agree, right? But that really was the question. Is it resistance or is it really not mine? So here's my take on how I began to tell. This took me a long time to figure out. We're talking, I can't even totally remember, but maybe months to a year. Especially because I really felt like those people, when it's so many people and it seems like a good thing and a lot of people talk about it positively, I really was like, it must be true. And I think in some scenarios and for some people it absolutely is. So that's the tricky thing, right? How do you know that it's just not the season for it? Or maybe like it'll never apply to you, but that's not to say that 90% of the people it wouldn't apply for, right? And that's why it's hard because it really could be that. And how would you know except for internally knowing for yourself, figuring it out? Here's the difference in my mind. When I feel resistance to something, my energy and my physical body shrink. Like I hunch my shoulders, my head drops, I feel small, I feel a little underpowered, right? I'm off kilter, and everything makes me feel kind of shrunken and smaller and like I'm up against something big, but I'm small. The physical body stuff is probably easier to tell because this is the what our body does when we're insecure, when we aren't sure. If someone, said, "Oh my gosh, so you're going to speak on stage here in 5 minutes," a lot of us would be like, "Oh my goodness," and we'd go inside, right? We'd shrink back. For me, then, when I saw something that didn't resonate, while I felt disempowered, like as in I wasn't sure what to do, ironically or paradoxically rather, my energy actually felt bigger. It was like there was a part of me, and it actually started happening in my emotions where I would get pissed. Like, not just annoyed or like bitter or frustrated. I get pissed. I was so angry. I was like, if one more person tells me to just surrender and let go, I'm going to scream and like probably set some of my stuff on fire. Like, I literally couldn't do it, right? But with that energy, even with the disempowerment, when I got angry about it, I felt bigger, right? And this is such a subtle thing. Think back to a time where someone came at you with a critique or you should have done this, and you knew that you had done the best thing for you in that situation, right? That's when we're like, hey, listen, this is what I did, right? Think about the subtle feeling in your body when you are like standing in that, in the no, I'm going to respond to you, and I'm very clear on why I did what I did. That's the feeling that I'm talking about. It's very subtle in terms of, shrinking and expanding because we get a little muddled in the loss of what to do still. Like, I may not have known if I was going to accept or reject that idea for me in that moment, but what I did begin to know was that that subtle feeling of, I'm not, this isn't me shrinking away from this idea. This is me leaning into it and saying, what is this? That's the difference that I began to feel. The reason I think it took me a while to get to it, and where I really hope to shorten people's time to this in making this podcast episode, is that because I wasn't super clear on it, it took a lot more iterations. Like every time that came up, I had to live it, and then, I got more info, and it was only after many of those that I began to notice the nuances of what was happening in my body and in my energy space of kind of expansion versus contraction. But with that nugget, we can begin to bring our awareness to those situations and begin to notice that part of ourselves. And the faster that we can pick up the information or bring that awareness, then we don't have to spend as long. That's the whole point of me making this, is that I really hope to fast track people onto being like, I see, for me, it could be, for you, it could be emotions that predictably come up, right? Or it could be a way of thinking that then gets fired off that lets you know. It could be physical sensations, or it could be like that energetic, like, that irks me a lot, and there's discomfort there, right? Whatever it is for you, the when you start to look for it, it's there. There we have all four of those bodies so that we have four different ways to get information, and obviously with the interplay of them, there's so many combinations and different ways that we can receive information and make decisions for ourselves. Bringing awareness to now you are looking at resistance versus is this really just not for me? Then you can begin to, in that moment, what's going on here. And at first, it's just noting because you don't even totally know what you're looking for, right? If you're like me, it'll be easier probably because you'll be like, oh, right, I actually see what she meant. But if not, it's really still the same process because honestly, if you're still like me, you still have to figure out how you interpret that and what happens and in different scenarios. So unfortunately, it doesn't get you out of the like full work. Sorry to tell you. But when we begin to notice what happens, then we get to bring that familiarity and speed up the process. So I really don't believe that it had to be as long for me. It was just, how I happened to figure it out, which is really exciting because think about what this means. If you can tell the difference between just kind of scared to do it versus like, that's not the right thing for me, what would that do for your decisions? What would that do for your parenting if you are one? What would that do for your business if you have one? What would that do for your career? What would that do for your partnership? The ability to understand our own cues is, again, it all comes down to the framework that Megan and I have: education, empowerment, enjoyment, right? That's once you understand, you're educated in how your body communicates around this, that cuts through all the confusion and all the avenues that we go down to try to figure that out and force ourselves to be doing something that we're not really into, then we feel empowered because now we understand it and can navigate it. And then once we can understand it and navigate it and we're standing in our empowerment, that's where life becomes and begins to feel more enjoyable. I hope you're feeling me on this because it's a pretty common, flow of things, and it's fairly predictable. We've been doing this for coming up to a decade together, and we've worked with thousands and thousands of women, and that framework is time and time again what we hear. And so this is another part of that. As we understand it, we take action on it, and we move ourselves forward in a more intentional manner and with a way of standing in our own decision making power. Now, if someone were to come to me and tell me some of these ideas, right, about the trauma or that kind of stuff, I don't have the same response because I know what I think in this moment for me, and I also know how I got to that decision, right? I read the cues for me, and if they change, I'll know that because I'm paying attention. And so now, if someone were to say that to me, I'd have one response. And I also feel completely empowered to say, I'm not stuck with that decision. If I feel later that I need to do something, I'm going to go do that. And I will know when that's true for me. So then we're really beginning to be less influenced by external forces. There's less overthinking, there's less hemming and hawing, there's less second guessing. And doesn't that sound nice? Right? Like that was the thing I realized. I was like, wow, that is a lot of time and energy I just got back by being able to tell the difference. The other thing that just came to me as I said that is that with all of this stuff, it's practice and you get better and better. And so I'm still, in the grand scheme of things, and all compared to the life I've lived, this is still fairly new for me. I completely expect that I will get better at telling the difference and finding discernment in what my internal cues are telling me about life and which direction is best for me to head. So in the beginning, or if you're in the middle of, maybe you're more advanced at this than I am, no matter where though you are, it's still just that journey, right? It's the journey of ourselves. And because we're always changing and things are morphing, we can always begin to get better and better. And as we acknowledge that we can get better and better, we have to acknowledge the flip side is that We can't get better if there aren't times where we miss the mark, get the info, learn from it, and that fuels further discernment. So the missteps are not off the path, they are redirections back onto it in a more conscientious manner. I think of it as bumper lanes in bowling, right? You get the ball going in the wrong direction. I don't even want to say wrong. It's not wrong. It's just a direction. It ricochets off, and you're back on track towards the bowling pins. Hopefully you've bowled, otherwise that doesn't make any sense. But so that is the deal. No beating yourself up, no guilting, no shaming. It really, with this kind of stuff, when you add a strong emotion like guilt and shame, it overpowers these more subtle sensations and cues that we have. So not only is it not helpful, but it's actually sort of getting in the way of doing it. So if you're getting into guilt and shame and you feel very strongly about it, take the time to process the emotions, sit with them. I've been sharing processes on the podcast that you can use, and there'll be a lot more coming. Sit with those. Once those have worked themselves through and you're beginning to feel them move, they don't have to be gone all the way. It doesn't have to be perfect. But once you sort of sit with them, then the subtleties are uncovered a little bit more and it does get easier. Alrighty, that is the podcast for today. Thank you for joining me. I can't wait to hear what you think. Tag me in your stories as always, and I will talk to you next time.
Thanks for coming out to hang with us on the podcast. It is our goal to transform the way women are treated in healthcare, and we need your help. We need your help to get the word out. We have a lofty goal of 1 million downloads, and we know that as this podcast grows, we're going to be able to reach more women, get more amazing speakers for you, and bring the most cutting-edge information.
If you found these podclasses helpful, please take a moment to text 5 women you know the link to the series. We appreciate your help so much. Can't wait to see you next time.